They both pierced armor. They both ended lives from a distance. And they both shaped the outcome of medieval warfare in ways no sword ever could. But between the thunderous crossbow and the lightning-fast longbow, which weapon truly reigned supreme during the brutal sieges of the Middle Ages? To answer that, we must go beyond the string and the bolt. We must walk through bloodied walls, shattered parapets, and the minds of the men who pulled their deadly triggers. It was not just about range or penetration. It was about who could survive longer when the walls began to fall. The longbow, sleek and silent, whispered death from afar with a speed unmatched by any other weapon of its time. Its projectiles could rain down like a storm, volley after volley, before the enemy had even crossed the moat. The crossbow, on the other hand, was a machine of mechanical dread, easier to use, simpler to learn. And when it fired, it didn't need a barrage. One shot was often enough. It tore through mail and morale alike. But while both weapons could kill, only one could dominate the field when the battle moved from the open plains to the walls of stone and fire. In medieval warfare, sieges were not just battles, they were tests of endurance, willpower, and engineering. And within these prolonged, harrowing confrontations, the question of weapon superiority wasn't just theoretical, it was practical, visceral, and immediate. Siege warfare demanded more than brute strength, demanded precision, consistency, and adaptability. A soldier manning a wall with a bow had to think not only about hitting his enemy, but about how many times he could fire before the enemy's siege towers reached the gate. Here, rate of fire became everything. Entered the English longbow. Forged from yew wood, it took years to master and a lifetime to perfect. The training began in youth boys growing up, pulling strings until their spines curved and their arms thickened like oak. But the payoff was undeniable. Skilled longbowmen could unleash 10 to 12 arrows per minute. Each arrow could travel over 250 yards and still puncture armor. During open battlefields, like Agincourt longbowmen turned French knights into pincushions before they even touched their lances. But on the walls of a castle, in the narrow confines of a siege tower, things got more complicated. The longbow required space to operate. You needed room to draw the string to your ear, room to angle your shot, and the strength to keep firing with consistency. In siege conditions, with enemies pouring over battlements and defenders jostling for position, that space often didn't exist. It's here where the crossbow proved its sinister genius. The crossbow, unlike its long-limbed cousin, was a mechanical beast. Even a peasant with zero training could learn to shoot it in a day. It fired a bolt shorter, heavier, and often more powerful than an arrow. The loading time was longer, especially for the more powerful models that needed a winding mechanism, but in the tight, claustrophobic spaces of a castle under siege, it didn't matter. You didn't need rapid fire. You needed accuracy and armor penetration. One well-aimed bolt could take down a knight scaling a ladder, and the weapon could be propped up and used from cover, making it ideal for shooting through arrow slits or from behind barricades. But let's go deeper. A longbowman was an elite warrior. Years of training, practice, and physical conditioning made him a valuable but vulnerable asset. Losing a longbowman in battle was not just a loss of firepower, it was the loss of years of investment. Crossbowmen, however, were replaceable, and in war, numbers often matter more than nobility. During sieges, when defenders needed every able-bodied man at their disposal, arming them with crossbows made sense. You didn't have to train them for years. You didn't even need them to be particularly strong. It's just wind, aim, fire, repeat. Still, range was where the longbow maintained an edge. In open siege fields, where armies surrounded castles and tried to suppress defenders on the walls, longbowmen could pick off enemies from distances that crossbowmen couldn't dream of reaching, but this advantage came with risk. You had to expose yourself. Crossbows could be fired from cover. Longbows couldn't. Tactically, this shaped how both weapons were used. Longbows were part of an offensive strategy used to suppress, demoralize, and thin out defenders before the assault began. Crossbows were more defensive, perfect for holding walls, piercing heavy armor, and picking off enemies from behind cover. But some armies, like the Genoese mercenaries, turned crossbows into offensive juggernauts, using large, heavy crossbows with cranks and winches that could penetrate shields and helmets alike. Before we go further, if you're fascinated by this clash of medieval engineering and want more epic explorations of warfare, ancient empires, and the weapons that shaped history, make sure to subscribe to the Vertex of Time right now. We dive deep into the past to bring its secrets to light, and your journey into history is just getting started. Hit that button. You won't regret it. Now back to the battlefield. Let's talk reload speed, a critical factor in any engagement. Longbow's reload was instant. You draw loose, and within a heartbeat, another arrow is already knocked. It was a dance of death, beautiful and terrifying. The crossbow, however, lagged. Even the lighter models took at least 15 seconds to reload, and the more powerful ones could take half a minute or more. In the middle of a battlefield, that delay could be fatal. But in a siege, when you were behind walls, it wasn't as much of a disadvantage. Slower pace allowed for more deliberate shots, and when every bolt could mean one less enemy scaling your wall, speed took a back seat to lethality. In fact, during the siege of Jerusalem in 1099, crossbowmen proved pivotal. Firing from behind fortifications, they decimated defenders with bolts that could pierce helmets and breastplates. The psychological effect of the crossbow was immense. Its bolt didn't just kill, it shattered bones, morale, and the very idea of invincibility. That metallic click before a shot became a sound of dread. Crusaders swore by it. Kings feared it. And in 1139, the Catholic Church even attempted to ban it for use against fellow Christians, labeling it too cruel a weapon unworthy of Christian war. That's how effective it was. But don't count the longbow out just yet. By the time of the 100 Years' War, the longbow had become England's secret weapon. At Poitiers, English longbowmen shattered the might of French chivalry. But those were field battles. Sieges like Harfleur, the limitations of the longbow became apparent. Without mobility and clear lines of sight, their advantage dwindled. Meanwhile, defenders armed with crossbows held tight positions, targeting attackers who had no choice but to climb, crawl, or break through. It's also worth noting the evolution of both weapons. The longbow remained relatively unchanged, relying on raw skill and biology. The crossbow, on the other hand, underwent mechanical revolutions. By the late Middle Ages, steel-prod crossbows with immense draw weights emerged. These could penetrate the best armor of the day, albeit with even longer reloads. But armies didn't care. In siege warfare, one good shot could stop a breach. A single bolt could stop the man carrying the banner, could halt the push, could delay the inevitable. In terms of psychological warfare, the crossbow arguably had the edge. It was hated, feared, and seen as dishonorable by many knights, precisely because it leveled the playing field. A peasant could kill a noble, no valor, no duel. Just one bolt and death. That threat changed how castles were designed. Arrow slits narrowed, parapets were reinforced, shields were raised higher. Crossbow had become more than a weapon, it had become a force multiplier. Now, let's talk cost. Longbows were cheap to make, but expensive in terms of training. Crossbows were the opposite, costlier to produce due to metal parts and mechanisms, but far cheaper in terms of manpower. For kingdoms under siege or under pressure to raise armies fast, this difference was crucial. Crossbows allowed for rapid militarization. Longbows required a martial culture, a generation of preparation. That's why the longbow thrived in places like Wales and England, where it was part of daily life. If you've come this far, it's because you're enjoying the video. So take the opportunity to subscribe, comment, and share. Crossbows dominated continental Europe, where professional armies and mercenaries were the norm. And in the dark underbelly of sieges, where brutality reigned, both weapons had one thing in common: they killed efficiently. Whether it was a bolt fired from a murder hole or an arrow loosed from a rooftop, both weapons turned castles into charnel houses. The difference lay in how accessible they were. Longbows demanded loyalty and lifestyle. Crossbows demanded only that you pull the trigger. So, which was superior? In field battles, the longbow might take the crown. But in siege warfare and the grinding, bloody contests of wall against wall, the crossbow reigned supreme. It was democratic, lethal, and unrelenting. The longbow was a precision instrument in the hands of masters. The crossbow was a blunt force trauma of strategy and design. And yet history didn't choose one over the other. It used them both. It used them both at place, each where it excelled. One for the open fields, one for the final stand at the gates. And that's the true lesson of medieval warfare. No weapon wins alone. The longbow and crossbow were not rivals, they were tools in a greater symphony of violence. And in the echoes of ruined walls and fallen empires, their strings and triggers still resonate.